Welcome to another episode of the Johnny and Friends Ministry Podcast. I'm Crystal Keating, bringing you real conversations about disability and finding hope beyond suffering, and exploring your questions about how to include people with special needs in your community and church. If you've ever been inspired by one of our episodes, be sure to subscribe and rate our podcast on your favorite app. We all know that raising kids can be daunting, but raising children with special needs often brings a new set of challenges. Days filled with doctor's appointments, meetings with teachers, juggling therapists and outside caregivers, and of course, caring for the rest of the family. With all of this, too many parents find themselves depleted and their marriages strained. But there is hope, and so today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Dr. Gary Chapman, counselor and best-selling author who developed the 5 love languages. He has counseled numerous parents of children with special needs and has great wisdom to share in his latest book co-authored with Jolene Philo. It's called Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. Listen now for some very practical advice when it comes to marriage and family relationships, and hear how you can download a free chapter of Sharing Love Abundantly. Well, it's an honor for me to be speaking with Dr. Gary Chapman today as we talk about the rich insights and practical tools found in his newest book, Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Chapman.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Well, good. I am so excited to speak with you today. And I'm sure many of our listeners will quickly recognize your name and maybe even your voice because you're the best-selling author of the 5 Love Languages series. And I learned this just newly. Your radio program airs on more than 400 stations. You're a world-renowned speaker, and you have been a counselor for many years with a passion for helping people form lasting relationships. I love that.
Well, it's been an exciting journey. God, I never ever intended to get into the counseling area, but as I got into the local church, I found that where people were hurting was in marriage and family. So it's been a very fruitful journey, and so encouraged to see the way God has used the various books that I've been able to write through the years.
Absolutely. And Dr. Chapman, something that's really near and dear to my heart is counseling. So before we talk directly about the new book you wrote with Jolene Philo, I'm really interested to know about your counseling practice and specifically your work with families impacted by disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about your many years of counseling experience and the time you've spent with these families?
Yes, working in the local church, of course, you have families from all backgrounds and all sorts of families and
Right.
Broken families. And many families are broken in one way or another. And also in every church, if it's any size at all, you have families with special needs children. And so my focus through the years has been on marriage counseling, but I've also, extended that to family counseling, of course, many times. And sometimes it's working with teenagers themselves, or young people who are struggling. But with special needs families, it's primarily been with the parents in terms of how to handle the stresses that come along with a child who is challenged.
Right. Talk about some of the challenges that parents often face, especially within their marriage.
Well, I think there's very unique pressures that are on a couple who has a special needs child. One is time constraints.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's face it, doctor's appointments, therapist appointments, teacher's appointments, the child's needs physically, it just takes time. And
Right.
often it's hard to focus on your spouse and your marriage relationship simply because you spend so much time working with a special needs child. So I think time constraints is one thing. Another, the financial strain that it sometimes puts on a family. I remember one family told me recently, said, our child's therapy is $30,000 a year.
Wow.
And that's in addition to all the regular expenses that they have. So, for many families, it does put a financial strain. And then I think also emotionally, sometimes parents will feel guilt because they can't fix, the difficulty with their child. They want to fix it. They feel like they should fix it. but they can't fix it. And then sometimes grief along with that. When the child's not reaching the milestones that they had hoped, the child would reach,
Right.
they can feel grief that they've lost what they dreamed of having with this child. Isolation's another thing, because many times, especially the mother, if she is the primary caregiver of the child, she often feels isolated. I mean, her husband's working all day. She's taking care of the child all day, and typically is still the major one in the evening and through the night.
Mm-hmm.
And often there's not anybody there to help her. And sometimes there's geographic separation, especially if the child is having medical treatments, at some location other than where they live, which is often the case, especially in the early stages of a child with disabilities. And I think, concern, you can call it concern or anxiety over the future. How long will this child live? I'm afraid they're going to die, and I'm not going to have much time with them. And then there's the other side of that is, what if the child outlives us? Who's going to take care of this child? So there's reason for concern. And then often there's not a lot of support that comes from the extended family and sometimes from the church. This is one of the things we try to emphasize in the book, is the extended family and church needs to jump in and be a part of this. But all of these factors often put stress on the marriage relationship.
Right.
And we know that there are times in which couples actually separate and divorce, and which is tragic, because if any child needs two parents, it's a special needs child,
Absolutely.
And so we're trying to give practical help to parents on how to work through acknowledging all these things, not trying to deny the reality,
Right.
but also recognizing that if God's put us here, then God can give us the ability to have a good marriage while we do this.
Amen. Amen. And that's so hopeful. And that's really the focus of the book. I mean, you identify the 7 major threats to a marriage. You just said them: time constraints, financial strain, guilt and grief, isolation, geographic separation during treatment, worry about the future, and lack of support. But then you really talk about the 5 love languages. How are the 5 love languages so impactful on a family who is really wrestling with disability?
Well, I think the 5 love languages really does help in that it lets them know how to meet the emotional need for love on the part of the spouse. I mean, almost everyone agrees our deepest emotional need as humans on the human level is to feel loved by the significant people in your life. And if you're married, that's your spouse, If in fact you feel loved by your spouse, then you can go on, you can keep walking. But if you feel like they don't love me, they're drawing away from me, it's painful. And so what the 5 love languages does, it lets the couple understand that what makes one person feel loved doesn't necessarily make another person feel loved.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to learn the spouse's primary love language and speak that language, heavy doses of it. So with the time you have, with the energy you have, you can invest it in the best possible way to meet that need for emotional love. So many, many couples have said, boy, discovering the love languages really, really helped us in our marriage, because now, with the time we do have, we know what to do to make the other person feel loved.
That's so good. Well, and we keep mentioning the 5 love languages. So what are they, and how are they helpful, especially to a married couple with a child with disability?
Well, one is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit. Or, honey, I really appreciate the time you're investing with Johnny, or whatever the child's name is. Just verbally affirming the other person, looking for things that you can affirm them for. And for some people, this is their love language. This is what makes them feel loved. And then gifts is also a love language. It's universal to give gifts. The gift says they were thinking about me. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. You can pick up a feather taking a walk, and take it home to your spouse and say, honey, I found this today when I was walking. It's a bird feather, but it reminded me, you are the wind beneath my sails. Wow. Yeah. And every time they look at that feather, they think about what you said, So for some people, gifts is their language. And then acts of service. doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. And of course, with a special needs child, man, there's a lot of things that need to be done. And even if this is not your primary love language, it's going to be helpful to you in that setting. But for some people, this is what makes them feel loved. You know, there's an old saying that says, actions speak louder than words. For these people, it's true.
It's
Actions
so
do
true.
speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And if you're not serving them in these practical ways, but you're telling them, I love you, honey, I'm so proud of you, and da-da-da-da-da, and they're thinking, if you love me, why don't you help me? You know?
Right?
And then number 4 is quality time, giving them your undivided attention. Doesn't have to be a 2-hour conversation. It can be 15 minutes, just sitting down and looking at each other and listening to each other. The TV's off, computer's down. You're not answering the phone. You're just looking at each other and sharing, thoughts and feelings with each other. Quality time. And then physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. Yes. In a marriage, this would be such things as holding hands and kissing and embracing and the whole sexual part of marriage. And so the basic concept is that out of the 5, each of us has a primary love language. And if you don't speak the primary, you can be speaking some of the others and they will not feel loved. And if they say to you one day, I just feel like you don't love me, and you will wonder, what do you mean I don't love you? And you rattle off the way you express love to them, and you're sincere, right, but you're just not speaking their language, and they don't get it emotionally. So understanding this, I think, is extremely helpful for a couple who has a special needs child, because with all the things we talked about earlier, you have limited time, limited energy in which to express love. Right. So let's use that time and energy in the best possible way by speaking their love language.
That's right. That's right. Well, and in the book, you wrote about making the marriage relationship the highest priority, which I think is really difficult to do in general, but especially when you have a son or daughter with special needs. I mean, because the immediacy and the urgency of needs can often put a strain on the relationship, as we've talked about. And I love this idea of filling each other's love tank. So can you talk about the concept of filling your spouse's love tank and how this really draws spouses together? Yeah.
I use that metaphor, a gasoline tank in a car. If it's full, you can drive a long ways.
Yes.
If it's empty, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
And so I like to picture inside every one of us, there's an emotional love tank. And if it's full, then you can conquer the world. If it's empty, oh man, life looks dark. And so the concept is, let's keep the tank full. And the way you do that is by speaking their primary love language and then sprinkle in the others to get extra credit, But you're right, in a special needs family, often you get the feeling, this child is the most important thing.
Right.
I have got to give time to this child, and I'm sorry, but I don't have time for you.
Right.
And that's a mistake, because the biblical concept is the husband and the wife are to be one flesh. I mean, deep, deep intimacy. And then together they minister to their children. But if you focus on the child and neglect the marriage relationship, first of all, you're doing the child a disservice, right, because the child needs the model of a mother and father who love and support each other. And you're really doing yourself a disservice, because if you don't keep the marriage as a priority, then you drift apart. And now you are alone, with all these responsibilities, you're alone. So that's why I say making the marriage a priority is it's important for any couple, but especially important in a family where there's a special needs child.
Absolutely. Well, and if it's God's priority, then He blesses when we put that effort towards making the marriage the focus. And I really appreciate that you brought that up. And, we've been talking primarily about marriage, but in your book, you go beyond that. Let's transition to how a mom or dad or primary caregiver, like a grandparent, can apply the 5 love languages to raising their child with special needs.
Yeah, well, I think a special needs child obviously has various needs. They may be physical, disabilities. It may be mental and other things. But every child has the need to feel loved. And this, again, is where the 5 love languages can be extremely helpful, because children with disabilities also have a love language. And one of these 5 is going to be more important than the others. And if you know what that is, then as a parent, it helps you communicate love to them in the most meaningful way. And so even though it's more difficult sometimes to discover the primary love language of a child with disability, it is an asset when you do discover it and you do choose to speak that language.
Right. And can you talk about some of the ways a parent can discover their child's love languages, especially when maybe the child is nonverbal?
Yeah, I think, as I said, it's much more difficult. But here are 2 or 3 ideas. Because, in a typical child that's a healthy child, I would say observe their behavior. That is, how do they respond to you? If they're always hugging you, then physical touch is probably their language. Or if they're always saying, "Mommy, you're such a good mommy," they're giving you words of affirmation, then that's probably their language. But that often doesn't work with a child with disability. And then I would also say, in terms of after observing their behavior, is you ask yourself, what does that child complain about? And so the complaint also reveals the love language. If they say, like I remember a 6-year-old who said to his mother, "We don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came." So he and his mother used to go to the park together, quality time. But now, since the baby came, he's not getting that. So the complaint reveals the love language. But again, that doesn't always happen with a child with disability. It depends, of course, on what the disability is. But here are some things with special needs child. You ask yourself, in the light of these 5 languages, what calms my child when they're upset? What calms them? If my talking to them and saying, "I love you so much, you are the sweetest child in the world," if they calm down, then words of affirmation is probably their language. Or maybe if you just put your arm around them and hug them, and say, "I love you so much," and they calm down, then physical touch is probably their language. So you can just walk through the love languages in that manner and ask yourself, what causes them to calm down when they tend to be upset? And that's a clue to what their primary love language is. Another clue is, what motivates my child? What makes them want to do what they can do? And obviously, different disabilities have different capabilities, but what motivates them to get involved in doing what they can do in a positive way? And then, where does a child choose to spend their time? Do they prefer to be involved with another child in the family, or with you, always wanting to do things with you or be with you? Then quality time is probably their language. So I think those are kind of clues as to what the primary language is. But here's what we suggest. Of course, when they're young, whether they have disabilities or not, the first 4 years of life, you give them all 5.
Right.
Just pour on all 5, because it's hard to discover a child's love language before about 4 years old. But then you begin to observe how the child responds to those 5 love languages. And by 4, you probably are going to be able to discover one of them seems to speak much more deeply to them than the other 4. And you probably are going to hit it. And then you give heavy doses of the primary love language, and then you still sprinkle in the other 4, because we want the child to learn how to receive love and to their ability give love in all 5 languages.
Well, and one of the things I appreciate in your book is that you focus on the child with a disability, but you also focus the parents on talking about their typical children.
Yeah.
And the sibling relationship between the child with the disability and the, quote, typical kids. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's similar kind of, you're observing your children, what lights them up, what gives them comfort, what motivates them.
Yes, and I think when there are typical children in a family, and often there are, then letting them know the concept about the love languages so that they understand we all have a love tank and we all have a love language, and this is Daddy's love language, this is Mother's love language, this is Susie's love language, this is Johnny's love language. Now, Mary also has a love language if Mary's a special child. Mary has a love language too. And So once you discover it, you can say, this is Mary's love language. So when we want to love Mary, every one of us wants to speak Mary's love language. And then we're going to also sprinkle in the others along the way.
That's
And the
great.
whole family gets in on the
Yeah.
idea. This is a loving family, and this is how we love each other. It really does enhance the emotional climate of the whole family. And siblings, healthy siblings, I mean, they'll get into it because they already, especially when they're younger, they already want to do things to help, other people. And they
Yes.
certainly will be into helping you express love to the special needs child.
That's wonderful. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the spiritual life of a family. Can you talk about a parent's relationship with Christ and how does that help them embrace a more non-typical life?
I think the Christian has many advantages in life in general. First of all, we have peace with God. We know that He's our Father, we're His children, and nothing ever comes to us but what it comes through His loving hands. And so if He gives us a special needs child, it is a gift of God. And so we accept it as a gift of God, not a burden, but a gift of God. And we recognize that we're God's hands and we are God's voice to this child. And we take pleasure in that. We don't feel like we're wasting time because we can't be out doing something else. No, no, no. We recognize this is the task God has given me to do. And so therefore, I want to do it well and I want to do it with God. And I think also the Christian family, you're talking to God all day long. You're just sharing life with God as you go through the journey and say, Lord, this is getting hard, and I'm getting tired. I need your energy here. So I think we have that advantage of having a fellowship with God as we're caring for the special needs child or children in our lives. I think the other factor is that our children need to know that we believe that God is our Father, and we do talk to our Father. And with our typical children, we're teaching them how to pray, and we're praying with them when we put them to bed at night. And we're reading scripture, perhaps a verse around the breakfast table, or if they're not morning people, in the evening we're reading scriptures, and we're talking this in the presence of special needs child, typical child, mom and dad, so that the Bible is a part of our lifestyle.
Yes.
And we recognize that what we read in the Bible, God is said to help us live our lives and to tell us about God and what God wants us to be doing. So the spiritual part of life has to be at the very center of the family
Yes.
if they're Christians. And this is why I say Christians have a tremendous advantage in having a healthy family because of the relationship with God.
Yes. Thank you. That brought tears to my eyes because I know how many families will be deeply encouraged by what you just said and knowing that God is with them and He can be at the center of that. And, with our podcast, we really want to talk to the churches and equipping churches to welcome and embrace families impacted by disability. And you hit it on the head when you talked about how the 5 love languages can also be used in a church and a community and families who are supporting spouses who have children with disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think more and more churches are getting on board with the idea that we need to be doing 2 or 3 things. We need to be offering something for special needs
Yes.
children and special needs adults as well. I think we're seeing more and more of that. We've had a group like that in our church now for at least 25 years. They meet on Sunday mornings so that there's a place where the parents can take special needs children while they then go to a Bible study class themselves or go to worship. So I think especially more larger churches are getting on board with that. But really, even smaller churches, if you have a family with special needs, imagine what this means to them. If they can bring them to a place where for an hour or 2 hours, someone's going to be caring for them and teaching them, on their level. So you're having a tremendous ministry, and you will attract other families who have special needs children. If their
Right.
church or some church doesn't have it, they're attracted to your church.
Oh, yeah.
So it's good for the church as well as for the families. But I think also extended family and church family need to be more and more in tune with the reality that this parent who has a special needs child needs some help. They need someone to come alongside them and identify with that child, get to know that child, where the child feels comfortable with them being around, so that they can say to the parent, why don't the two of you take a night, go do something, just the two of you, let us take care of the kid tonight, Oh, man, that kind of breather. I say to couples, if you're really under that kind of stress and somebody comes in and offers that, even if you go to a movie, you might go to sleep before the movie starts, but that's okay. Just sleep through the movie.
Oh, they get a break. It's that sense of respite and just relaxation that, it breaks from the 24/7 kind of responsibilities that families often face.
Yeah. And, a family that has all typical children, they need times off like that too. But it's easier for them to get a babysitter, what we call a babysitter, easier for them to get that than it is if you have a special needs child, because not just anyone can come in, and work with a special needs child. That's why members of the family and the church need to reach out. I'd say, if there were 3 or 4 people that identified with a family with special needs children, and they got to know that family and know that child, and they took turns, periodically doing those kind of things, oh man, it would just be wonderful for that special needs family.
It certainly would. Well, as we close our time together, Dr. Chapman, can you share just a simple plan that families can use to begin identifying and using the love languages?
Well, I think what I would say, I would start with the couple. And actually, you can go online and take a free quiz. It's 5lovelanguages.com. And there's one for married couples. There's a quiz for single adults. There's a quiz for teenagers. There's a quiz for children. And you can go on there. It's free. It'll help you discover your family. Now, it doesn't do that for the special needs child. We talked earlier about how to do that. But I think, first of all, is just say, we're going to try to learn everybody's primary love language, and then we're going to learn how to speak these love languages so that our family is going to be a loving family. So it's getting that concept in your mind and discovering the love languages, and then teaching the children how to speak each other's love language. So it's not everything about family life, but it's a huge part of family life, and it creates an emotional atmosphere that's healthy. And then we can process all the rest of life much easier when everybody feels loved.
So true, so true. Dr. Chapman, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience of how the 5 love languages can truly strengthen a marriage and family life impacted by disability. And I just love how you provided such practical guidance on sharing love abundantly, no matter our circumstances. God bless you, Dr. Chapman.
Well, thank you, Crystal. Good to chat with you today.
I am so inspired by the wisdom and practical advice that Dr. Chapman shared today. I know that his tips for connecting as a couple and filling your spouse's love tank are helpful for any marriage, but especially a marriage facing the additional challenges and stresses related to disability. If you want to learn more, pick up a copy of Sharing Love Abundantly. It's a great read. It has insights for parents of children with special needs to strengthen their marriage and family life, as well as ideas for how a church and community can serve in a family's network of support. And remember the quizzes that Dr. Chapman mentioned to help you learn your own love language? Visit johnnyandfriends.org/podcast today to take your quiz and download a free chapter of Sharing Love Abundantly. Thank you for listening, and for more on this topic, join me again next week when I'll be chatting with Jolene Philo, co-author of Sharing Love Abundantly. Drawing on her own experience with disability and serving as an educator for 25 years, Jolene has some great advice to share. I'm your host, Crystal Keating, and thanks again for listening to the Johnny and Friends Ministry Podcast.